But a lot of Democrats are standing up and speaking out about cases like Abrego Garcia's and others, and saying that what is happening to him could absolutely happen to American citizens. One of them is New York Democratic Representative Ritchie Torres, who has introduced a bill to require the U.S. government to act if a court orders the return of someone who has been wrongfully deported. I spoke with Congressman Torres on Wednesday afternoon. Representative Torres, welcome to What a Day. On Wednesday, a federal district judge said there was probable cause to open a criminal contempt inquiry related to his order to stop some deportations to El Salvador back in March. What's your side of the aisle in the House doing about this?
Look, we're committed to fighting back. I introduced legislation known as the Rescue Act, which would impose consequences on any country like El Salvador that refuses to release someone who's been wrongfully deported in violation of a federal court order. For Democrats, the stakes are high. The stakes are high for the country. Of everything that Donald Trump, there's nothing worse than his frontal assault, his war on due process. And it has implications far beyond non-citizens. Like the Trump administration can label anyone a non-citizen gang member, abduct them in the dead of night, and then render them unto a foreign prison to be tortured. And so he is setting a dangerous precedent for the future of our democracy.
Mm-hmm. And are you seeing common ground with your GOP colleagues on this?
I suspect that there are Republicans who privately have concerns, but none of them are willing to speak out publicly against Donald Trump. The Republican Party is no longer a traditional political party. It's become a cult of personality, right? The MAGA movement is organized not around principle, but around personality. It's all about Donald Trump. He can do no wrong. It's religiosity without religion.
Well, on that note, Democrats kind of lost big to that religiosity without religion in November, especially when it came to immigration, migrants, and deportation. And a lot's happened since then, and folks in your party have been sorting out who could be deported and when, under what circumstances. Where have you landed on this?
Look, I have no objection to deporting those who genuinely violate either criminal law, immigration law, or both, especially if you pose a public safety risk. But you're entitled to due process. There is no contradiction between border security and due process, or between a rational immigration system and due process. And the Trump administration is attempting to create a contradiction where none exists. Due process is based on the recognition that the government is every bit as corruptible and fallible as human nature itself, right? The government can err, it can abuse its power, it can falsely accuse, and due process is what protects all of us from false accusations and abuses of power on the part of the government. And if we lose due process, as far as I'm concerned, we lose everything.
Let's talk about a specific case, the one over Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He's the migrant who has not been convicted or even charged with a crime, but was still sent to a prison in El Salvador. The administration says, with practically zero evidence, that he's a member of the Salvadoran gang MS-13. What does that tell you about how this administration is going about deporting people?
Look, Donald Trump claims that he has the authority to label anyone a gang member and then deport them to a foreign prison to be tortured and then wash his hands and claim that the courts have no jurisdiction because he's deporting them to a foreign country. Never mind that he's paying the foreign country to detain these people. So he clearly has responsibility. He clearly has leverage. But we're entering dangerously uncharted territory. For me, the lesson learned from the Trump presidency is that Congress historically has passed too many laws that have ceded too much power to the executive. Mm-hmm. We should repeal the Alien Enemies Act, which has enabled Trump to deport hundreds of people without due process, without the slightest semblance of due process. We should repeal the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which has enabled Trump to set tariff rates that have destabilized the global economy. The U.S. Constitution envisions a system of congressional supremacy, right? There are three co-equal branches of government, but Congress is the first among equals. We are Article I branch, and we should return power back where it belongs, which is in Congress.
Mm-hmm. But to do that right now, you would need Republican buy-in, just because of the makeup of both chambers. That seems pretty unlikely. So what can you do right now?
Look, we have to throw the kitchen sink, whether it's mobilization on the streets, legislation in the halls of Congress, even a discharge petition, and litigation in court. Obviously, there are limits to what we can do when we're in the minority, but I'm convinced that the momentum is on our side. I mean, Donald Trump is uniquely unpopular as president. Like, he's the only president since 1937 whose approval rating is underwater in the early months of his administration. So Democrats are well positioned to take back the House, to make Hakeem Jeffries the next speaker, and to restore some measure of checks and balances. But I have no faith that the moderate Republican Party is going to stand up to Trump because he's their Lord and Savior.
I've seen this on my TikTok FYP. I'm sure you've seen this on social media. I feel like the conservative line is, well, he's playing chess and we're playing checkers. So take this with a grain of salt. But are you concerned that Democrats are playing into the administration's hands right now by highlighting the Abrego Garcia case?
Well, first, fighting for due process is the right thing to do. Like, I'm in favor of free speech, not because it polls well, but because it's a matter of principle. So not everything has to be reduced to a political calculation. There are some issues that are so important that it transcends politics. Habeas corpus, due process are among them. But the polling would tell a different story. I mean, Donald Trump is self-destructing in real time. You know, since his inauguration, we've seen the destruction of $11 trillion in wealth. His tariffs are deeply unpopular. His trust on issues with the American people is declining rapidly. So the momentum is clearly on the Democratic side, largely because Donald Trump is self-destructing. He's his own worst enemy.
Representative Ritchie Torres, thank you for being here. Thank you for the conversation, and keep doing the hard work.
Absolutely. Take care.